Well, we don't, in many respects, need to deal with it. Not least of all because it is the monarch that is the key.
An urgent letter had arrived at the royal household, and those close to Princess Anne could sense something was terribly wrong. She opened it slowly, unaware that within those lines waited the kind of truth that could shake even her steady heart. For years, Anne had stood as the pillar of strength within the royal circle, but this time even she couldn't hide the weight pressing on her heart. "It's something we never saw coming," a royal aide whispered. In the hours that followed, what happened inside the palace would change history's course forever. The unseen storm. The royal palace was still when the call came through, carrying words that no one expected. The staff who answered froze as if time had stopped. Her face turned pale as the message was being passed to her. The night air outside hung heavy with anxiety, as if the world already knew something had gone terribly wrong. "Her Royal Highness must be told immediately," a senior aide said, her voice trembling. Princess Anne had been in her study, sorting through letters and reports. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound that filled the room. Her hands paused mid-air when she saw her aide's expression. The look alone told her that something serious had happened, something that would not be easy to face. "It's best you sit down, ma'am," another staff member whispered. Anne lowered herself slowly into the chair, the papers forgotten on her desk. The silence stretched for a long time before words finally came out. The aide spoke of a devastating loss that struck at the heart of her family. Every word seemed to pull the air out of the room. "We just received confirmation. It's true." Anne's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. The news rolled through her mind again and again, but it refused to settle. For years she had built her life around duty, discipline, and loyalty. Yet now, for the first time in a long while, she felt herself slipping away. "How could this happen so suddenly?" she asked one of the aides. But the answer didn't come. Anne's eyes moved toward the window where the palace gardens stood in darkness. The lamps flickered against the glass. She thought of the person involved, of the strong ties that bound her to them. It all seemed like a lie, too sudden to believe. "We need to prepare a statement," another voice broke in with the tone of duty and control. But duty could wait. She stood and walked slowly toward the door, her steps heavy. Her years of service had taught her to face crises with composure, yet this moment tore through that armor. "Leave me for a moment," she said quietly. They left without a sound, closing the door behind them. She stood alone, her mind drifting through memories. She thought of times when she had watched other members of the family fall under the same kind of sudden shock. Now it was her turn to bear it. "This will reach the press within the hour," another aide reminded her through the door, and she knew that was the truth. News like this never stayed hidden. The weight of it would soon reach the public, bringing endless questions and speculation. She would have to stand before the world again, wearing the face of strength even when her heart could not catch up. "We should alert the king," the aide added. Anne leaned on the desk, her hand brushing against the cold surface. The familiar space around her offered no comfort. "Do you want me to call Zara?" the aide asked gently. The mention of her daughter pulled her back from thought. She nodded slightly. It was time her family knew. The palace had handled many storms, but this one felt different. It reached deeper, into places the public could never see. "Tell her I'll speak to her soon," Anne said softly. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the tall windows. The sound seemed to match the rhythm of her thoughts. "We'll handle the arrangements," the senior aide assured her. She gave a nod of approval. Even now, the royal household moved forward. It had done so for generations. But she knew that behind every surface there were hearts that broke just the same as any others. "No one must speak until we confirm every detail," Anne warned. Anne turned slightly, her eyes distant. She had lived long enough to know how quickly truth could twist in the public eye. It was the burden that came with the crown, even for those not wearing it. "I'll face it," she murmured, almost to herself. The staff exchanged worried looks but said nothing. They knew better than to interrupt. The princess had always been the one who carried on when others could not, but tonight she stood at the edge of something she could not control. Princess Anne's private struggle. The morning light crept through the curtains of Gatcombe Park, spreading across the wide lawns where horses often grazed. The stillness in the atmosphere usually brought her peace, but that peace had faded in recent days. The place was moody, and every step she took seemed to echo a little louder. She kept her composure as she always had, but something inside her had shifted. "You've always managed to hold everything together," an old friend once told her during a visit. Princess Anne had grown up in the shadow of duty, raised to work, to lead, and to never fret when eyes were upon her. She had earned respect not by noise or show, but by effort. Long days, long travels, several causes that she supported without complaint. Her life had always been a line drawn between the public and the private, and she walked it carefully. Now that line felt thinner than ever. She never slowed down, not even for herself, a palace insider remarked. The people around her had always seen strength before anything else. She had built it that way. Behind that strong image, though, she had faced her share of heartbreaks. The end of her first marriage, the pressure of the press, the long years of scrutiny, they all shaped her into someone who rarely allowed emotion to show. However, in her private world, away from duty, she was deeply attached to those close to her. She had a softer side, but only her children saw it. Her bond with Zara and Peter stood as one of her life's true anchors. They shared moments that few outsiders ever knew. Laughter behind closed doors, rides across the fields, small talks by the fire. She taught them what it meant to stand tall even when the ground shook beneath them. The strength that others praised in her had been born from these moments of simple love and teaching. "My mom never wanted praise," Zara had once told a friend. Even her children, known for their own toughness, struggled to reach her. "She's pretending to be fine," Peter told one staff member. She spent her days moving through official duties, answering letters and attending meetings, although her mind wandered elsewhere. The small moments between tasks became the hardest to endure. She often walked through the gardens at dawn, letting the air touch her face, as if nature could take away the weight she bore. Gatcombe Park had always been her refuge. It was where she found the rhythm of normal life, where family and horses filled her time instead of ceremony and tradition. But now, even that familiar place seemed different. The walls carried a silence that pressed in from all sides. The sudden news that had reached her days before seemed to follow her into every room she entered. "She hasn't been herself since that night," one aide confided to another. Her brother, the king, had called to check on her. Their relationship had always been one of mutual understanding. They shared the same upbringing, the same weight of expectation. Still, even his words could not lift the burden this time. She spoke with calm, but her eyes, according to those who saw her, revealed something different, something raw. "Would you like to step back from engagements?" Charles asked, but she refused. That had always been her way. Work had been her armor for years, and now it became her escape. Each royal duty kept her focused on something bigger than herself. She visited charities, attended briefings, and sent messages of support to organizations close to her heart. Outwardly, she seemed unaffected, but those who stood beside her every day knew the truth. "She's holding it in because that's what she does," a staff member explained. Her friends from early years tried to reach her through letters and visits. They spoke of shared memories, riding lessons, laughter in younger days, and the adventures that once took her far from the palace walls. They hoped to remind her of lighter times, but it wasn't easy. The news had stirred something more than grief. It made her question the balance between personal loss and public image. "She told me once that duty never ends, even when the heart breaks," a close friend recalled. The public admired her for showing strength, but what they could not see was the full story behind her eyes. "People think she's made of stone," an insider commented, but those who knew her best understood that she was not immune to pain. She had only learned to carry it differently. She believed that the monarchy stood strongest when its members remained steady, no matter the storm. That belief had guided her through countless trials, but this one tested her more deeply than any before. Days turned into weeks, and the palace settled into calmness. Her staff moved with respect, giving her space when needed, standing by when asked. The balance between public strength and private sorrow became her daily challenge. "She'll never let them see her break," an old friend said. Annie paused for a while, eyes fixed ahead before turning away. Duty still waited, but the woman for the role carried a heart heavier than anyone could see. The news no one expected. The rain had stopped by morning, but the clouds still hung low over Windsor. The air carried the scent of wet stone and cut grass. Inside the palace, the corridors were strangely empty. Everyone knew that something was about to be said, something that would change the atmosphere in the royal household. "The statement is ready for release," an aide said quietly as he entered the drawing room. Princess Anne sat near the window, her hands folded on her lap. Her face gave nothing away, but her eyes were set deep in thought. The news had come to her days ago, but now it was time for the world to know. "Make sure the details are exact. No mistakes," she said in a low voice. She had read the report twice, hoping to find an error, something to ease the weight of it. But the truth stood firm. Now the task fell on her to break the news, something she had always avoided. The family's unity had always been the face of the monarchy's strength. Any sign of weakness could stir controversy. Yet this was not about image or headlines. This was about someone she cared for deeply, someone she had shared private laughter and long conversations with over the years. The king instructed that it remains dignified. The aide continued gently. Anne nodded, understanding what that meant. Anne looked at the paper in front of her. The printed statement was short, formal, and controlled. Every word had been reviewed several times. It said only what was necessary, revealing no emotion, offering no space for speculation. Still, she could feel the ache behind each line. "I'll read it myself," she said after a moment of silence. She prepared herself, taking a slow breath as she rose from her chair. Years of discipline kept her movements steady, but her heart felt heavier with every step toward the door. "They're ready when you are, ma'am," another aide said softly. She walked through the corridor lined with portraits of past monarchs, their eyes watching as she passed. Their presence seemed to remind her of the strength that history demanded from those who carried royal blood. Yet this time, that strength felt like a curse. "No questions," she instructed firmly. The courtyard was cold. The press stood behind the barriers with microphones raised. The statement was just a few sentences announcing the condition and requesting privacy. The crowd listened in silence as her voice echoed softly across the stone walls. "The family appreciates your understanding," she said to close the message. When she finished, she folded the paper and turned away without pause. "You did well, ma'am," her personal assistant said gently. Cameras flashed behind her, but she didn't look back. The rain began again as she walked through the archway toward the waiting car. Inside, she stared ahead, her expression relaxed but distant. Her thoughts drifted back to the moment she first heard the diagnosis. It had been late one evening. The call came from a trusted physician who had known the family for decades, his voice professional and sorrowful. She remembered the pause before he said the words. She had known something was wrong even before he finished speaking. He didn't want anyone to worry, the doctor had told her. Anne respected that wish, but the secrecy had made it harder. For years, their bond had been built on honesty. Now she was forced to keep something so painful locked behind duty and discretion. She thought of the moments they had shared, public events where they stood side by side, dinners at the estate, and the smiles exchanged across rooms full of people. "He trusted you the most," a close relative had said when they met days later. That trust weighed on her now. The world would soon turn its eyes on them, searching for emotion in every gesture. The palace had already prepared responses for questions, though few would be answered directly. Anne's role was to hold fast, ensuring dignity remained even as the truth began to spread. "She'll face the storm before anyone else does," one senior staffer told a colleague. Back at Gatcombe Park, she walked alone through the halls, the echo of her footsteps mixing with the sound of the rain outside. The horses shifted in their stables, restless under the dark sky. She paused at the window, her reflection faint in the glass. The world outside continued as always, unaware of how deeply this moment had cut through her life. "I must be strong for the sake of my family," she whispered to herself. Anne closed her eyes for a moment, holding on to those words. They offered a little comfort, something she could cling to in the midst of the storm that had begun. Still, she knew that time would not stand still. The press would move on, but she would carry this news alone, long after the headlines faded. "You've done all you can," her private secretary said gently that evening. "We all know how difficult it is to stay strong," another staff member added. She gave a small nod but said nothing. Outside, the rain drummed against the windows like a heartbeat that wouldn't slow. She sat by the fire for a long while, her thoughts drifting far from the palace, far from duty. "He always admired your strength," the secretary added before leaving the room. Anne stared into the flames, her eyes lost in reflection. For once, the royal shield she wore so well began to slip, revealing the woman beneath. The sister, the mother, the friend. Somewhere deep inside, the news had changed her in ways no one would ever see. Echoes through the kingdom. The morning after the announcement, the palace seemed thick with whispers that never reached full words. Newspapers arrived, stacked on silver trays, their headlines printed in bold letters that no one wished to read aloud. Each staff member moved with careful steps, unsure how close they could come without crossing unseen lines of grief and duty. "They've printed every detail they could find," an aide said as he placed the papers on the table. Princess Anne entered the room in her riding jacket, her expression indifferent. She glanced at the front pages only once before pushing them aside. The faces of her family filled the covers, framed by sympathy and speculation. She did not bother reading them. Her eyes moved instead toward the window where the sun still shined brightly above the gray sky. "Let them write," she said flatly, pulling on her gloves. Outside, reporters lined the gates again, waited for a glimpse of her reaction, but she gave them none. The car rolled slowly past the crowd, the flashes reflecting against the tinted glass. Anne looked straight ahead, her thoughts buried deep beneath layers of control. It had always been her way. Face the noise by rising above it, never letting emotion spill where strangers could see. "It's always the same cycle," she said to herself. The king had called earlier that morning, his voice steady but low. They spoke briefly, exchanging a few words. The royal family had entered another season of public attention, one that required unity no matter the pain they felt. Anne promised she would keep her schedule unchanged. Her sense of duty remained unbroken, even when her heart felt anything but steady. He asked her to take time off, an insider later said, but she refused. That afternoon she attended a long-planned engagement at a rural training center. Crowds gathered to greet her, unaware of how drained she truly felt. She smiled, shook hands, and listened to every story with patience. The cameras followed her every move, looking for signs of weariness. None came. Yet those closest to her could see the small things, the slower steps, the distant gaze, the way her voice carried a softer edge. "She's holding everything inside," one attendee murmured. Back at the palace, phones rang constantly. Messages of concern flooded in from across the world. Other royals, world leaders, and charity heads sent kind words and condolences. Her private secretary organized each response carefully, ensuring that none went unanswered. Anne read through them at her desk, replying to as many as she could. Gratitude was written between the lines, though pain followed every word. "Tell them we're grateful for their kind words," she said after reading the last letter. The staff admired her focus. She kept moving as if routine could shield her from the ache that followed her everywhere. But the nights told a different story. Long after the palace went still, lights stayed on in her study. The faint scratch of a pen could be heard as she worked through piles of correspondence that didn't need immediate attention. Work had become her way to keep grief at arm's length. "She doesn't sleep much these days," a maid observed. Outside the palace, the public sympathy grew quickly. Messages and flowers began to appear at the gates, forming a sea of color along the black railings. Each card carried words of support, love, and sorrow. The people had sensed her pain even without seeing it. Their kindness became both comfort and reminder of how visible her life always was. "She deserves peace," one visitor said softly as she laid down white roses. The royal press office managed the story carefully, providing brief updates and controlling speculation. Still, rumors found their way into magazines and talk shows. Some claimed divisions inside the family, others spoke of strained relationships behind closed doors. None of it was confirmed, but each headline added another layer to the storm. Anne ignored it, though the weight of false words pressed close around her. "We can't stop them from talking," her communications officer admitted. Her brother visited a few days later. Their meeting lasted hours behind the heavy doors of the library. They spoke in low tones, sometimes pausing for long moments of silence. No one knew what was said, but when he left, his expression matched hers, solemn and resigned. The palace corridors filled again with whispers once he was gone. "The royal family is handling it privately," one advisor explained to the press. Meanwhile, her children arrived at Gatcombe Park. Zara stayed close, offering quiet company instead of conversation. Peter managed the outside affairs, ensuring the media kept their distance. Together, they formed a small circle around her, one that asked for nothing except presence. The comfort of family felt fragile but real. "Grandma just needs space," Zara told her children, who had called to ask how she was. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of palace life returned gradually. Public events resumed. Headlines began to fade. Yet inside the walls of her home, the change remained. The news that began this storm continued to cast its shadow. Each update reminded her how uncertain life could become, even for those surrounded by crowns and ceremony. "She's prepared for whatever comes," said a senior aide who had known her since childhood. Autumn leaves began to gather around the garden paths. The horses in the paddock snorted softly in the morning fog. Life outside the palace gates moved on, but for Anne, the world had slowed to a point of reflection. She carried the weight of both loss and responsibility in the same measured stride. Each engagement, each handshake, each word served as a shield between her and the ache that followed her home. "No one does it like she does," one courtier said with admiration. When night fell, she often returned to the stables before heading inside. The air smelled of hay and rain. She would rest her hand on a horse's neck, feeling the warmth against her palm. For a few moments, the titles and the headlines disappeared. She was simply Anne again, a human like every other person, standing beneath a wide sky that seemed to carry all her secrets away into the dark. The price of the crown. The palace gates stood closed against the mist that rolled over Windsor in the early hours. Inside, the corridors held the weight of unspoken thoughts. The announcement that had shaken the family still lingered, shaping every plan, every decision. What had begun as private sorrow was now a web of consequences that touched the throne itself. "There's no avoiding the public reaction," a senior advisor said during a morning briefing. Princess Anne sat at the long table, her notes arranged neatly in front of her. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Her eyes moved across the reports outlining how the situation had changed public opinion. Support had grown, but so had curiosity. The nation wanted more details, and the press pressed harder for answers. Every silence from the palace only deepened their questions. "We'll keep it brief and respectful," she said, voice steady. She understood how delicate the balance was. The monarchy's strength depended on composure, however. The line between dignity and secrecy was thin. Too much silence invited speculation. Too much openness risked intrusion. Each choice came with a cost. She carried the weight of that choice as she had done her entire life, bound by duty and loyalty both to family and country. "Her instincts are sharp, but this is a hard path to walk," an aide whispered to another. The news that had shaken their world also altered future plans. Certain engagements were postponed, others reassigned. Behind every polite announcement lay a hidden struggle. The royal household had to adapt without revealing too much. Anne found herself at the center of it all, trusted, reliable, but constantly torn between public image and private pain. "You'll have to speak again soon," her secretary reminded her gently. She nodded. The public expected reassurance, but her words had to be chosen carefully. She drafted her own notes late into the night, avoiding sentiment but adding warmth where she could. Every sentence reflected her belief in restraint. Yet in her heart she longed to speak freely, to show the humanity behind the crown. "The truth hurts less when it's spoken openly," her daughter had told her one evening. That advice stayed with her. Zara understood what the public didn't see, the effect that silence took. Anne had raised her children to value privacy, but now even she saw how isolation deepened pain. The family had gathered several times in the past week, each visit memorable and meaningful. They spoke of ordinary things, horse riding, family dinners, the grandchildren, but beneath every word was the shadow of worry. "We'll get through this, Mum," Peter had said when he left for London. Those words comforted her for a time, though she knew strength often required distance. Her duties continued, pulling her back into the cycle of work. Meetings filled her calendar and cameras followed wherever she went. Every smile, every nod became part of the performance expected from her position. She carried herself as she always had, though her heart often lagged behind her expression. "She looks calm, but she's weighed down," a longtime friend noted. Her inner circle began to notice how the strain showed in smaller ways. Letters went unanswered for longer periods. Evenings once filled with conversation were replaced with hours of paperwork. She began spending more time alone, walking the grounds or sitting by the window after dark. The pressure of maintaining control had begun to affect her. "Perhaps you should rest, ma'am," her physician suggested gently. Rest, however, was not something she knew how to accept. The monarchy did not wait for emotion, and neither would she. Still, she could not ignore how the situation had changed her perspective. For decades, she had believed that duty must always come first. Now, she saw how that same belief left little room for personal healing. The line between strength and suppression grew thin. "If I stop now, everything will unravel," she told her aide one night. Her dilemma deepened when private letters began arriving from public figures, some urging transparency, while others advised silence. Each one carried conflicting counsel, forcing her to choose between heart and tradition. The institution expected her to maintain its image. Her conscience urged honesty. Somewhere between those two worlds, she searched for balance. "I'm stuck between what's right and what's required," she opened up to a family friend. Meetings with palace officials became longer and more tense. Advisors debated strategies to control the narrative, each offering polished suggestions that never touched the heart of the issue. Anne listened, patient and thoughtful, even though she was frustrated. The illness had turned from a family crisis into a national story, and she could do little to protect those she loved from its impact. "We'll announce updates only through official channels," one communications officer proposed. Those who heard her speak understood the weight of her words. Anne had always lived within boundaries that few could imagine, but now, the wall that protected her from the public also kept her from reaching out for comfort. Her siblings checked on her often, their concern clear, though expressed in polite tones. Still, she remained mostly alone with her thoughts. "She hides her pain because she thinks it helps everyone else," a courtier explained. Weeks passed. The press continued to circle, their lenses trained on every appearance. Supporters sent letters of admiration and love, while critics questioned the silence. The public demanded transparency, but the palace held firm. The royal family's privacy became both shield and target. Through it all, Anne stood unwavering, her face composed even when exhaustion shadowed her eyes. "You're doing all you can," her private secretary reminded her again. Anne gave a faint smile. Now she thought of the past and how everything now seemed connected by this single thread of sorrow. The future looked uncertain, but she had no choice but to keep walking. "Whatever happens next, we face it with grace," she said finally, her tone firm. Her aide bowed slightly and left her in the room. She remained seated for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Duty still called, as it always did, but this time it carried the echo of a question that no tradition could answer. The crossroad, truth or tradition? The rain cleared by dawn, leaving Windsor wrapped in soft gray light. Princess Anne rose early as usual, her steps measured and sure. The palace corridors were almost empty, the air carrying the faint smell of damp stone. She had slept little, but her thoughts had settled into one clear line. The time for indecision had passed. The days of waiting for others to act were over. Something within her had changed. She woke before anyone else, a maid later recalled. Anne dressed without help, choosing a dark blue suit that matched the sky outside. Every movement felt deliberate, almost rehearsed. She glanced at the clock on her table, then at the small folder of documents beside it. They held everything she needed for the meeting ahead, a plan that would alter not just her duties, but the course of several royal commitments. The illness had forced her to see what truly mattered. "It's time to face things directly," she murmured. Breakfast was quiet, the ticking of the clock louder than usual. She read a few messages, nodded to her staff, and rose before the meal was done. Her expression revealed nothing, but everyone sensed her determination. Outside, the palace courtyard glistened with dew. The car waited, engine humming softly. She stepped in without hesitation, her mind already fixed on what she would say when she arrived. "There's no turning back now," she told her driver. The journey into London felt longer than usual. Buildings blurred past the window as she reviewed her thoughts in silence. Every decision she had ever made came from duty, but now it came from truth. She could no longer hide behind the rules that had protected her for so long. This choice would not please everyone, but it would bring honesty back into a house that had grown too careful. "She's stronger when she decides for herself," said her former secretary. The meeting began promptly at 10. Senior advisors sat around the oval table, papers neatly stacked, expressions formal. The tension was visible. Anne entered with her usual poise, taking her seat at the head. No one spoke at first. She scanned the room, meeting every eye before opening her folder. What followed was not a speech, but a declaration, a clear statement of intent. "We must speak plainly about what we face," she began. "You're suggesting full acknowledgement?" one advisor asked with caution. She nodded. The room fell into silence. For decades, the royal family had balanced privacy and transparency like two fragile glasses. Her proposal tipped that balance, but she knew that dignity did not mean secrecy. The people had shown loyalty through change and loss. They deserved sincerity in return. Her gaze held as she explained how openness could protect, not endanger, their legacy. "We can't protect the crown by hiding pain," she said firmly. Those words cut through the room. Even those who disagreed could not dismiss her conviction. She spoke not as a symbol, but as a woman who had lived through scrutiny and survived it. She reminded them that strength was not built from silence but from honesty wrapped in grace. When she finished, there were no interruptions, only thoughtful faces and direct stares. Back at Windsor, she returned to her office and began writing letters by hand. Each note was personal, one to her brother, one to her daughter, one to a close friend. She explained her decision not with apology but with reasoning. Her handwriting, steady as ever, filled the pages neatly. She sealed each envelope herself before placing them in the outgoing tray. It was her way of owning the choice, her assistant commented. That evening, Anne walked alone through the royal gardens. The air carried the scent of rain and roses. For years, she had walked these same paths to clear her mind, but tonight felt different. The air itself seemed lighter, as if the weight she carried had begun to lift. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, the late queen, and how she had handled her own crises with grace.
It's really quite difficult to follow in your parents' footsteps in the same sport.
Now she realized that every generation must choose its own way to protect the crown. Hers would be through honesty. When the statement was released 2 days later, the world responded quickly. Headlines filled every paper and television anchors repeated her words. Yet the tone was different from past controversies. Respect, not shock, shaped most reactions. Many praised her courage for speaking so clearly. Others questioned whether the palace could maintain control. Through it all, she remained firm, attending her engagements with the same grace. She reminds me of her mother, one aide whispered. Anne's decision changed the tone within the royal household. It showed that honesty could coexist with dignity, that silence was not always strength. Behind the scenes, other family members began reassessing their approach. Even those who doubted her at first now admired how she faced the storm without bending. Her words had opened a door that could no longer be closed. It felt like a new chapter for the family, remarked one senior courtier. Days turned into weeks. The tension began to ease, though the world still watched closely. Anne knew the hardest part was still ahead, but she had crossed the line she feared most, the line between duty and truth. What came next would test her strength again, but she would meet it with the same steady resolve that had defined her life. She thought of everything she had risked, tradition, trust, expectation, and realized it had been worth it. Some truths could not stay hidden forever, and now she had spoken hers. A door left open. The storm of public reaction had begun to fade, but something else stirred behind the palace walls. Princess Anne sat alone in her study, her papers stacked neatly beside the fading light. She had done what few in her place dared to do. Still, the feeling of completion did not come. "The truth changes more than we expect," said her secretary. Anne rose slowly and walked toward the balcony. She rested her hand on the railing and let her eyes follow the horizon. Her phone, left on the desk, buzzed with incoming messages. She did not turn back to check. The headlines had already reached her. Praise mixed with speculation, sympathy with new questions. Every story carried a different version of her truth, yet none could touch the meaning behind her decision. She had spoken once and changed everything, but now she wondered what her words might awaken in others. "You started something bigger than you think," a friend had warned her days earlier. In the weeks since, changes had begun inside the palace. Certain meetings took on a new tone, long-avoided discussions returned. There was talk of revisiting royal roles, of redefining traditions. Her decision had loosened the oldest knots in the institution. She had not meant to start a movement only to tell the truth, but honesty, once released, never stayed contained. "It spread faster than any of us planned," an aide admitted later. That night, Anne opened the drawer beside her desk and took out a small leather notebook. Its cover was worn from years of use. She flipped through the pages, notes on horses, engagements, and reflections. Near the end, she stopped and began to write again. The words were very personal, not even for family. They were a message to herself, a reminder that courage carried a price and truth demanded patience. She wrote for hours without stopping, her lady-in-waiting said. Anne walked toward the portrait that hung above the fireplace, a painting of her mother, serene and composed. For a moment, she studied the familiar face, remembering the lessons that had shaped her entire life: restraint, duty, endurance. The queen had faced storms of her own, yet she had never allowed emotion to show. Anne had followed that path for years, until now. Now she had done what her mother never could. She had shown the crown's beating heart. "You'd be proud, wouldn't you?" she whispered softly to the portrait. Then a knock came at the door. Her secretary stepped in, holding an envelope sealed with a royal crest. The paper looked newly delivered, the ink still fresh. He handed it to her without a word. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet, letting her eyes move slowly across the message. After a long pause, she folded it again and placed it face down on the desk. "Bad news, ma'am?" the secretary asked quietly. Anne did not answer. Instead, she turned once more toward the window. Whatever the letter contained, she knew it would shape what came next. She said only one thing before leaving the room, the secretary recalled. "Everything has changed." The words hung in the air long after she walked away. He stood there, unsure whether to follow or stay. When he finally looked at the letter again, the seal of another royal household caught his eye. It had come from Balmoral. Something about its arrival felt almost urgent. Down the corridor, Anne's footsteps echoed steadily toward her private chambers. She passed portraits of ancestors who had faced their own crossroads. The faces seemed to watch her as she moved through the dim light. Her reflection followed in the tall windows, strong, composed, yet shadowed by uncertainty. She reached her door, hesitated, then turned off the light behind her. "She looked like someone carrying more than duty," said the night guard. Beyond Windsor, the press had already begun guessing the next twist. Was there more to reveal? Was the letter connected to a deeper issue inside the family? No one knew, but the timing seemed too precise to ignore. Every network prepared new coverage. Even the loyal editors hinted that another story was about to unfold. "Something big is coming," a reporter said outside the palace gates. In her room, Anne placed the letter beside her notebook and sat at the edge of the bed. She simply stared at the envelope, aware that whatever it contained would pull her forward once again. Change had come, but it had not finished its course. The story was only turning another page. The decisions she had made, the words she had spoken, the truth she had released, none could be undone. The crown had been reshaped, and so had she. This isn't the end. Perhaps it's only the beginning. Do you think this could be the start of an evolution for the monarchy? Let us know your views in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.